I was 19 when it happened. My parents had just left town for a week-long business trip. It wasn't the first time I stayed home alone, but this week was different. Our house is out in the middle of nowhere in Montana, surrounded by thick woods. The closest neighbor is half a mile down a dirt road, and it's so quiet out there you can hear leaves rustle when the wind blows. It's peaceful, until it isn't. It all started on a Thursday afternoon. I was at the gas station filling up my car like any other day. A black SUV, an older Jeep Cherokee, pulled up to the pump next to mine. I barely noticed him at first, but when the guy got out, something about him made me uneasy. He looked normal enough, mid-40s, scruffy beard, baseball cap low on his face, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. While the gas pumped, he leaned over and asked, "Excuse me, miss, do you know how to get to the nearest motel?" His voice was polite, almost overly so. I told him about a small motel off Route 27. That should have been the end of it, but instead of pulling out his phone, he took out a tiny, beaten-up notepad and started writing. His eyes flicked back to me. "You live around here?" he asked casually. I hesitated. Why would he ask that? "Sort of," I muttered, trying not to give anything away. He smiled again, too wide this time. "Pretty name, Emily." My stomach dropped. I hadn't told him my name. How did he? Oh, my stupid name tag from my part-time job. I mumbled a quick thanks, finished up, and got into my car. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, but I kept telling myself I was overreacting. It was probably just a weird coincidence. As I drove off, I saw him in the rearview mirror. He was watching me. The drive home felt longer than usual. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that black SUV behind me. But the road stayed empty. By the time I pulled into our long dirt driveway, I was almost laughing at myself. "You're paranoid, Emily," I thought. The SUV was just some random guy. There was no way he could know where I lived. Right? That night I tried to relax. I made pasta, watched a movie, and FaceTimed my friend Sarah. Around midnight, I finally decided to head to bed. I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. A voice. It was faint, like it was coming from outside. I turned off the water, my heart pounding. I listened harder. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Emily." It wasn't a yell. It was soft, almost a whisper, but deliberate, like whoever it was knew I could hear them. My hands were frozen on the sink. Slowly, I crept to the bathroom window and peeked out. The yard was pitch black, just trees and shadows. "It's nothing," I told myself. "An animal." The wind. I locked every door and window, turned off the lights, and crawled into bed. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. At 3 a.m., I heard footsteps on the gravel driveway. Slow, purposeful. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my phone and whispered to the 911 operator, "Someone's outside my house. Please hurry." When the police finally arrived, I watched their flashlights sweep the yard. They found nothing. One officer told me it was probably a deer. I nodded like I believed him, but I knew better. Deer don't whisper your name. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. I was tired, stressed. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I decided to run errands in town to clear my head. On the drive back, I saw it, the black SUV. It was parked on the shoulder of the road just a few hundred feet from my driveway. My heart dropped. I slowed down, staring at the SUV. The windows were tinted, but I could feel someone watching me. I sped up, turned into my driveway, and locked my doors the second I got inside. When I peeked out the window a minute later, the SUV was gone. That night, it happened again. I was in the kitchen when I heard it. Emily. This time it was closer, right outside the basement door. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial 911. The police came again. They checked the yard, the basement, even the woods. Nothing. One officer said, "Miss, you're probably scaring yourself." I wanted to scream at him. I wasn't imagining it. The next evening I was done. I packed a bag and decided to stay at Sarah's house. I wasn't spending another night alone. When I stepped outside to get to my car, I froze. The black SUV was parked halfway down the driveway, its headlights off. The man from the gas station, the one with the notebook, was standing by the driver's side door. He was watching me. I ran to my car, throwing my bag inside and fumbling with the keys. Please start, please start. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him walking toward me. Emily, don't run. I slammed the car into reverse, the tires screeching against the gravel. As I sped down the driveway, I saw him in the rearview mirror, standing there, still watching. I stayed at Sarah's that night. I didn't sleep. I kept imagining that man breaking into my house, searching for me. The next morning, the police called. There's been a break-in at your house. My stomach dropped. They said a neighbor noticed the front door wide open. Nothing was stolen, but the house was trashed. It was like someone had been looking for something, or someone. When my parents rushed home, we went back to the house together. My room was the worst. Clothes were scattered everywhere, and on my desk was a note. It was written in the same notepad I'd seen at the gas station. I'll see you soon, Emily. The police took the note, but there were no fingerprints, no evidence, just words that haunted me. My parents wouldn't let me stay there anymore. I moved in with my aunt in a busier town, but I never stopped looking over my shoulder. A month later, I saw it, the black SUV. It was parked at the far end of a grocery store lot. I froze, my heart pounding, but when I looked again, it was gone. I never saw him after that, but I still think about him, about the whispers, about the note, because some people don't disappear. They wait and watch. I don't even know where to start with this, but here goes. I'm Ryan, and this happened when I was 18. It's been a couple of years now, but I still think about it almost every day. If you're into creepy stories, buckle up. This one's real, and it messed me up pretty bad. So my family used to own this old lake house out in northern Minnesota. You know the type, super isolated, surrounded by trees, and with nothing but a small, quiet lake out back. We'd go there a lot when I was a kid, but as I got older, my parents didn't use it as much. By the time I turned 18, they decided to sell the place. It was kind of sad, but I didn't really care. I was always more of a city guy anyway. Before we listed it, my parents said I could go spend a weekend there on my own, one last hurrah. So I packed up my car, grabbed some snacks, my PS4, and headed out. The drive was long and boring, but when I got there, the house looked exactly how I remembered it. Old, dusty, and silent. I parked in the driveway and got this weird feeling in my chest, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I brushed it off as nostalgia and started unpacking. As I was hauling stuff inside, I noticed something odd. There were wet footprints on the porch, like someone had just been standing there. It had rained the day before, so I figured it was just an animal or maybe even my own paranoia. I locked the front door behind me and tried to shake the uneasy feeling. After all, I was alone, miles away from the nearest neighbor, in a house surrounded by nothing but woods and water. What could possibly go wrong? Once I settled in, I turned on the power, hooked up my PS4, and started playing a game to pass the time. It felt good to zone out and forget where I was. The only sounds were the rain tapping against the windows and the faint creaks of the old house. That's the thing about places like this, they're too quiet. A couple of hours in, I was getting into the game when I heard it. A loud metallic crash coming from the backyard. My heart shot into my throat. It sounded like it came from the old barn about 100 feet behind the house. At first I tried to ignore it. Maybe something just fell over. The wind, an animal, I don't know. But then I remembered the footprints on the porch. I paused the game and just sat there for a second, trying to decide what to do. Eventually, I grabbed the old wooden baseball bat my dad used to keep behind the door, slipped on my shoes, and stepped out onto the back porch. The barn was dark, almost pitch black, and the rain had turned into a light drizzle. I could hear nothing but the sound of my own breathing as I slowly approached it. The barn door was swinging slightly, creaking against the wind. I shined my flashlight inside and nothing. It was just the same old barn filled with rusty tools, lawn equipment, and cobwebs. I walked around a bit, checked behind the riding mower and the old shelves, but there was no one there. Probably just some raccoon, I muttered to myself. I turned to leave, but as I did, I noticed the barn door. I was sure I had closed it when I got here. No way, I whispered, suddenly feeling a chill crawl up my spine. I pulled the door shut tight and jogged back to the house, locking the door behind me. I told myself it was all in my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been watching me. After I got back inside, I locked every door and window in the house just to be safe. I told myself it was probably nothing, just my imagination running wild. But let me tell you, when you're alone in a place like that, even the smallest noises can make your skin crawl. I sat back down in front of the TV, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing over my shoulder, listening for anything unusual. Then I heard it, a faint sound coming from upstairs. It was like footsteps, slow and deliberate, creaking on the old wooden floors. My blood went cold. There was no way. I was the only one there, right? I turned off the TV and listened. The footsteps stopped. I thought maybe I was hearing things, so I brushed it off and tried to calm down. But then a minute later, I heard it again. Creak. 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 It was coming from above me. My brain started racing. What if someone had been hiding in the house the whole time? What if they were in one of the rooms upstairs? I grabbed the baseball bat again. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to give myself away. I crept to the base of the stairs and looked up. The hallway at the top was dark, the only light coming from the small window at the end. My heart was pounding as I climbed the stairs, one step at a time, the wood creaking under my weight. When I reached the top, I stood still, listening. The house was dead silent again, but I knew I'd heard something. There were 4 doors up there, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. All of them were closed. I swallowed hard and moved to the first door on the left, my parents' old room. I pushed the door open slowly, my hands shaking. I shined my flashlight inside, but the room was empty. I checked the next 2 rooms and the bathroom. All clear. I started to feel a little better. Maybe I really was just being paranoid. And then I saw it. The door to the last room at the end of the hall, the guest room, was slightly open. It had been closed when I came upstairs. I was sure of it. My stomach dropped. I crouched down and looked through the gap under the door. There, standing perfectly still, were 2 bare feet facing the door. My stomach turned into a knot and I swear I stopped breathing. Those feet didn't move. They were just there, like whoever it was knew I was watching. I stood up, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped the bat. I wanted to run, but my legs felt frozen. I had to get out of there. Now. I turned and bolted down the stairs as quietly as I could, skipping 2 steps at a time. I didn't care how loud I was at that point, I just needed to get away. Once I hit the bottom, I ran straight to the kitchen and grabbed my phone, fumbling to call 911. As I whispered to the operator, I heard it. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow. Heavy. "Someone's in the house," I hissed into the phone. "Please send someone now." The operator told me to stay calm and stay hidden. I grabbed the bat again and locked myself in the pantry. I sat there in the dark, holding my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped outside the pantry door. I swear I could hear the man breathing, then he tried the handle. It rattled. "What do you want?" I screamed, trying to sound braver than I felt. No answer. Just silence. Then, after what felt like forever, I heard the front door open and slam shut. The police showed up about 10 minutes later. I don't think I've ever felt so relieved in my life. They searched the house and found nothing. The guy was long gone. But here's the part that still haunts me. The officers found a dirty sleeping bag and a backpack in the barn. There were food wrappers, clothes, and even a knife. The man had been camping out there for who knows how long, watching the house and waiting. I never went back to that place again. My parents sold it a month later. But I'll never forget those feet, standing perfectly still on the other side of that door. You know how every horror story starts with someone alone in a house? Yeah, that was me. I was 17, and my parents and sister had gone to my cousin's wedding out of town. I begged to stay home. No long speeches, no family drama. Just me, my PC, and a Call of Duty marathon. My room is upstairs right above the living room. It was around 9:30 p.m. when I heard the doorbell ring. I almost didn't hear it over my headphones, but when it rang again, twice, I paused the game. I ran downstairs, slightly annoyed. Who the hell rings the doorbell this late? I peeked through the peephole, and there she was, a middle-aged woman, maybe in her 50s, wearing a long, oversized sweater and jeans. Her face was pale, but what got me was her smile, big and unnatural, like someone had glued it there. "Sweetheart," she said softly, her voice muffled through the door. "My car broke down. I just need to use your phone for a second." Every alarm bell in my brain went off. My parents' rule echoed in my head. Never open the door for strangers. "Sorry, I can't help," I said, trying to sound calm. "There's a gas station a couple blocks away." Her smile didn't move, but her tone shifted. "It's cold out here," she said, almost accusing. "You're really going to leave an old woman out here?" I froze for a second, unsure what to say. "It's my parents' rule," I finally mumbled, and started closing the door. That's when her face changed. The smile stayed, but her eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake," she whispered. My heart dropped. I locked the door, bolted it shut, and sprinted back upstairs. I sat at my desk, staring at my screen. My game was paused, but I couldn't focus. Something about that woman was off. Her voice, her smile. It was like she was playing some kind of game. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the living room window. My stomach turned to ice. I knew it couldn't be her. She was just at the front door. Slowly, I crept down the stairs and peeked through the curtain. A tall man was standing in my yard holding a flashlight. His face was partially hidden under a hoodie, and he was scanning the area like he was looking for something. "She was here," he said softly, like he was talking to himself. Then he turned and shined the light right at the window. I dropped the curtain and ducked. My heart was racing. Was that her husband? Why were they both here? I crawled back upstairs and sat frozen in my room, gripping the baseball bat I kept next to my bed. I tried to convince myself it was over. Maybe they'd leave. Maybe they were just weirdos. Then the doorbell rang again. This time it wasn't just a ring. It was followed by pounding, loud, angry knocks that shook the door. "We know you're in there," a voice shouted. It was the man. I felt sick. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but the call didn't go through. No service, of course. My parents had always said the signal in our neighborhood sucked. That's when I heard it. Glass shattering. The sound came from the basement. I knew what it was. The small window near the ground. They were inside the house. I ran to my parents' bedroom at the end of the hall and locked the door behind me. I crouched next to the window that overlooked the backyard and tried to think. I couldn't fight them, and I couldn't call for help. My only option was to hide. Footsteps echoed from the basement, slow and deliberate. I heard the man's voice. "Where is he?" "Upstairs," the woman replied softly, almost like she was singing. "I can feel him." I opened the hallway closet and slipped into the crawl space inside. It was dark, dusty, and barely big enough for me to squeeze into, but I had no choice. I pulled the door shut, leaving just a crack so I could breathe. I heard them coming up the stairs. Creak, creak, creak. Every step felt like a nail being hammered into my chest. I heard the man's voice getting closer. "He's hiding. Check the rooms." The woman's footsteps were softer. I heard her humming like a lullaby as she opened doors and peeked inside. I stayed still. My breathing was shallow. I could see her feet through the gap under the closet door. She stopped there, right in front of me. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then, in the sweetest voice, she whispered, "I see you." The door handle rattled and I thought I was dead. But then the man called her from another room. She paused, muttered something, and walked away. I don't know how long I stayed in that crawl space, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. When everything was quiet, I decided I had to get out. I crept to my window and opened it slowly. The roof of the garage was just below, and I managed to lower myself down without making too much noise. From there, I sprinted across the yard to the shed. I locked the door behind me and collapsed on the floor, trying to calm down. Then I heard it. The woman's voice, right outside the shed. "Sweetheart, come out. It's time to go home." I held my breath, praying she wouldn't open the door. The man's voice joined her. "We just want to talk." The handle turned once, twice, but it held. Then I heard sirens in the distance. Finally, the cops showed up minutes later. I stayed hidden in the shed until I heard someone shouting, "Police!" They found the man and the woman in the front yard. Apparently, they had been breaking into homes across the area, targeting houses where teens or elderly people were alone. They would knock, trick you into opening the door, and then, who knows? The cops said I was lucky. If I hadn't hidden, they might have found me. I moved out of that house years ago, but I still think about that night. About the way the woman smiled, about the way she said, "I see you." And every time I hear a knock at the door, my heart stops for a second. Hey guys, it's 3 a.m., and if you're here, you're probably scrolling through YouTube looking for a scare. I need to tell you something that happened to me. Something I wouldn't believe if it hadn't happened with my own eyes. It's been months, and it still haunts me. I used to live alone in a modest 4-bedroom house in Pennsylvania. It wasn't some creepy mansion or anything, just a normal suburban home that felt too big once my roommates moved out. I had my bedroom, a gaming room, and 2 rooms I barely touched. One was full of storage boxes. The other, completely empty. It's funny how something as ordinary as an empty room can take on a life of its own when you live alone. This all happened on a Thursday night. I remember it clearly because it was my day off the next day, and I was ready to game until the sun came up. I worked a crappy retail shift, got home at 9:30, and stopped at Wendy's on the way back. Burgers and Cody, a perfect night. I threw my bag of food on the desk, booted up my PC, and got into it. The house was dead quiet except for the hum of the computer and the occasional crunch from my fries. I put on my headphones, started a match, and let the outside world fade away. About 30 minutes in, I felt off. You know when you get that feeling? Like you're being watched? I ignored it at first. My brain's always messing with me when I'm alone late at night. But then I heard it. A faint tap, tap, tap. I yanked off my headphones, my heart pounding in my chest. Nothing. Just silence. Probably just the house settling. I whispered to myself. That's what everyone says, right? I put the headphones back on and tried to shake it off. Another hour passed and I finally forgot about it, until I heard it again. This time, it was louder. Thump, thump, like footsteps. I froze, every hair on my neck standing up. The sound came from upstairs. Slowly I stood up, grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my door. Living alone teaches you to be paranoid, and crept out into the hallway. It was pitch black except for the faint light spilling out from the gaming room. "Hello?" I called, instantly regretting it. My voice sounded too small, too weak. Silence. I walked down the hall, each step creaking under my weight. When I reached the empty room, I saw the door, a door I never opened, was cracked open. I know for a fact I hadn't touched it in weeks. Nope. I backed away, my hands slick with sweat. I locked my bedroom door behind me, crawled into bed, and pulled the blanket over my head like a 5-year-old. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I convinced myself I'd imagined it. I mean, I was tired and it was probably just the house settling, right? I spent the day out with friends trying to laugh it off. But when I got back that night, I felt uneasy. It was like the house had changed. Everything seemed darker, quieter, heavier. I double-checked every lock, front door, back door, windows, all locked tight. I even checked the empty room. Nothing, just dust and the smell of stale air. By midnight, I was back in the game room. I promised myself it was going to be a normal night. I was wrong. An hour into gaming, I felt it again, that heavy, sinking feeling. I took off my headphones and listened. Tap, tap, tap. It was unmistakable now. The sound was coming from inside the walls. "Oh, hell no," I whispered, my blood turning to ice. I grabbed the bat and walked out into the hallway. I could hear it more clearly now. The tapping was moving, slow and deliberate, like footsteps shuffling inside the walls. I pressed my ear against the wall, and that's when I heard it. Breathing. I stumbled back, my bat clattering to the floor. There was someone in the walls. I bolted downstairs and called 911. I must have sounded insane on the phone, babbling about footsteps and tapping sounds, but the dispatcher took me seriously when I told her I could hear breathing. The cops showed up within minutes. They searched the entire house while I stood in the driveway, shaking. I expected them to find nothing, to tell me I was crazy, but they didn't. One of the officers called me over. "You're not gonna like this," he said. Inside the empty room, hidden behind a loose panel in the closet wall, they found it, a makeshift crawl space. Someone had been living in there. A sleeping bag, fast food wrappers, empty water bottles, and a small notebook. The notebook still haunts me. It was filled with entries, all written in messy handwriting. He doesn't know I'm here. I can hear him playing games. I watched him eat tonight. He left the door unlocked again. The last entry was from the night before. Soon. The police didn't find whoever it was. They said the person probably heard me calling 911 and escaped through the back window, which had been pried open. I moved out the next day. I didn't even pack half my stuff. I just left. It's been months and I still have nightmares about it. Sometimes I'll wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear that tap, tap, tap in the walls again. So if you live alone, do yourself a favor. Check your closets, lock your doors, and never ignore strange noises, because you never know who's watching you. But